You know what? It seems like we're winning because people hate Trump. Nah, I won't release that autopsy. Well, he might have to now because that Axios report that came out said that one of the things that they're trying to cover up and or not talk about is, wait for it, Deb, you'll be shocked. A lot of people were pissed off about a genocide and I think let's start with the DNC audit because it's really big news that came out yesterday in
Yeah,
Axios.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about the APAC of it all, and then we could talk about war with Iran and
Mhm.
all these great, lovely things I'm discussing with Debra Shushan. I mean, one of these days I'm gonna have her on and everything will be fine. And she'll talk about kosher, where I can find a really tasty kosher like sandwich, kosher pastrami sandwich, because I can eat kosher. And then I'll tell her where she can find a really halal sandwich in New York. But where we are right now, folks, is the world is burning. And some of the world's worst people who do not care about safety or security, about Jews, about Muslims, about Palestinians, are using our communities and perverting certain narratives for their end game, which is about power in the hands of the worst people possible. And the rest of us, and perhaps even the world, might burn as these completely compromised, deranged individuals, Deb, are in power, steering us all off the cliff. But thankfully, there are sane individuals like Debra Shushan is a senior resident affiliate, the Center for Jewish Civilization at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Her Substack is fantastic. It's called The Debrief with Debra Shushan. She has fantastic, smart guests. She is a doctor, a PhD, and she knows the American Jews, plural, very well. She was part of J Street, and so she is a fantastic insider that can give the nuances of what's happening. And I was telling Deb right before we press live, I think it's very important, and I say this as a Muslim who's and a child of immigrants. You see what happens with demonization. You see what's happening with scapegoating. You see what happens when people don't do nuances. It's very easy to quickly say the Muslims when you're just talking about, oh, I don't know, Al Qaeda, or to say the Jews when you're talking about like a hard right pro-Israel lobby, right? And I think it's important to get the nuances right, and for us to be very careful about the language we use, and for us to also see that within this struggle for justice and equality, side by side, are Jews who have been saying for a long time, yeah, genocide, bad, occupation, bad, Netanyahu, bad. So I think this is very important. Deb, thank you for joining. Let's start local.
Yes.
You saw that Axios piece yesterday that there was a leak that one of the reasons why Ken Martin has gone against his promise to Democrats, to Ken Martin, the head of the DNC, who promised that he will release the autopsy of the 2024 election. Oops. You know what? It seems like we're winning because people hate Trump. Nah, I won't release that autopsy. Well, he might have to now because that Axios report that came out said that one of the things that they're trying to cover up and or not talk about is, wait for it, Deb, you'll be shocked. A lot of people were pissed off about a genocide and what Netanyahu and the war criminals are doing in Gaza. Your response to what you saw yesterday?
I mean, I'm not surprised, and I know you're not surprised either by, we knew after the election from polling and reporting that had come out after the election that the top reason that people who had voted for Biden in 2020 stayed home in 2024 and didn't vote for Kamala Harris was Gaza, right? And this is predominantly, I mean, certainly impacted Muslim communities, but also young people, across backgrounds who were pissed off about Gaza, about the fact that the Biden administration more or less gave Netanyahu a blank check, was totally one-sided in terms of empathy, refused to have Palestinians on stage at the DNC, which was a terrible mistake, and something I was very upset about at the time. And so, we knew about that. The one new piece of information that we now have is that the DNC discovered this itself, which, if it was an honest audit, which it should be, obviously. I mean, if the DNC wants to actually change going forward and be able to defeat Trump and Trumpism, you need an honest audit, obviously. And so the only thing that we really know now is that, yeah, that the DNC knows this itself. I mean, it's pretty disturbing that rather than own up to this, rather than face it and think about what does it mean going forward, the DNC just chose to bury the audit altogether. I mean, that is extremely problematic for folks like you and me who have been, who have been saying, listen, this clearly impacted Harris, and we need to figure out what to do going forward so this doesn't happen again.
Why? Okay, so because people get conspiratorial real quick. Uh, to me, it would seem, hey, Democrats, clearly, it is in your interest to follow your own base, which includes, last time I checked, I think majority of Jews, especially young Jews,
Oh, absolutely.
who are like, end this or put conditions or be tougher or don't. Oh, I don't know, like Chuck Schumer and all these other folks. Cory Booker was there peeking like, where's Waldo in the summer, taking a smiling photo with Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, clearly this is not good for you, your brand, and to win elections. And you know it. We told you. The YouGov poll came out and said the main reason, not the only reason, that 18 million Democrats stayed at home. Because, folks, let's be honest, if those Democrats that came out in 2020, a third of them had even come out and voted for Kamala, she wins. But it
Right.
was the Democrats who were like, no. And the reason was, Deb, I think you and me, we did our best. We said, for the love of God, please vote for Kamala. I know it sucks. I know they've screwed over. I know the DNC is effed up. I know this is indefensible, but Trump will be worse. And people said, I can't vote for genocide, man. And then we gave them a low bar, and they still wouldn't bring a Palestinian on stage. And I'm sure you and me, we begged. We're like, it could be worse. There is genocide plus. It will be worse, and it is worse. But
Yeah.
you're like you were there. You're in the leadership space. You were with J Street. You know these partners. Like, what in the year of 2028 could compel them, 2026 compel them to be like, we could get away with this. Nah, they won't care. Even though it didn't work in 2024, it'll somehow work in 2026, Deb.
Yeah, I mean, there clearly is a blinded mindset. I think, part of it, there are some Democrats who genuinely, hold this perspective about Israel doing no wrong, and are really loath to switch to a different kind of understanding of how U.S. policy needs to change vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians. That it's not enough to just wrap yourself in the blanket of a two-state solution and actually do nothing to curb the excesses of right-wing Israeli regimes. I think that's part of it, but then I think, there's also the question of money from APAC. And I know you recently had Hakeem Jeffries on your program, and I watched as you gave him, the opportunity to change course and say, that he wasn't going to take money from APAC. And obviously he couldn't say that. I mean, he's not we're dealing with a party that is unwilling to disentangle itself from this organization that used to be predominantly democratic
Yeah,
and has changed character. I mean, this is an organization that is predominantly funded by GOP billionaires who are trying to impact the results of democratic primaries, and we can talk more about that.
absolutely.
And I think it's important for us to talk more about that. But obviously, the party is just not willing to come to terms with it, and they would rather bury this,
It's
and
just
they would
wild.
rather potentially lose again than
That's it,
to
Deb.
change.
That's it.
Yeah,
Like, you would rather lose again for this,
yeah,
for Netanyahu. You would rather lose again
and
for Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, and this,
and APAC money.
and
I mean,
APAC.
Yeah, that,
It's, speaking about APAC, because I don't think you know this. Can you talk to us about the insider view within Jewish American communities? I think it's important. precisely what I said because people lump us all. There's a lumpage.
Mm.
All Haitians, all Somalis, all Jews, all Muslims. No, 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 folks. Can you talk to us how J Street was created as a counter to APAC, what that meant and why that was important back in the day? Because people,
Sure.
common baseball to you and me, most people have no idea.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about it. So, J Street was created toward the end of the Bush administration, uh, basically right about the time that Obama was about to come into power after, as he was being elected. The idea was that the hope was that President Barack Obama was going to take the steps needed in order to actually bring about a peaceful agreement, a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. There had, obviously been plenty of talks and plenty of attempts. It hadn't happened. The understanding was that if Obama were to do that, APAC would go hard against him, right? APAC would not let that happen. So the idea was that there needed to be a counterweight to APAC from the Jewish American community who could basically act as the blockers, the backers for President Obama to give him the opportunity and the space to push Israel, right? Because that's the only way, the understanding, that's the only way. Israel is the stronger power, but, that you have to push them to make concessions. And so that's what J Street was created to do. And the other, understanding was that AIPAC and other legacy Jewish organizations in Washington were not representing the Jewish American community, which is, overwhelmingly progressive, which has long favored a Palestinian state, living in security next to, security and peace and justice and equality, et cetera, alongside Israel. And so, the idea was there needed to be an organization that was a more faithful representative of the Jewish American community. And so, and as time went on, another big issue in which J Street and APAC faced off was the issue of the Iran nuclear deal, which was really the major accomplishment of Obama's 8 years in terms of foreign policy, which was coming to a diplomatic solution agreement with Iran. It's called the JCPOA. It was extremely successful
Yep.
until Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump got together. And Netanyahu really pressed Trump, and he threw the nuclear deal out the window in 2018, which has a lot to do with where we are right now.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so one of the key, APAC, what Netanyahu was against the JCPOA, APAC was against the JCPOA, and J Street did play an important role in lining up the necessary support to prevent forces in Congress from killing the JCPOA. So that's another issue on which the two have faced off.
And can you then explain how J Street kind of now I know many former J Street people who said, okay, even J Street didn't keep up with where many of young Jews were going.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just to be clear, I don't work for J Street anymore. But look, I think within a lot of the more, you know, progressive, but still somewhat in the middle. I mean, there are certainly Jewish organizations that are to the left of J Street for sure. So, the ones J Street is part of this umbrella group called the Progressive Israel Network, and many of those organizations, I think, um, inside of them during after October 7th, um, during the war, and Israel's, when it became clear that Israel was committing atrocities in Gaza, there's a lot of tension within a lot of these organizations about how quickly to kind of pivot from, Israel has a right to defend itself to, for example, calling for a ceasefire. And certainly, that's been an issue within a lot of organizations and more broadly within the Jewish American community. And increasingly, you have folks, I mean, there were always folks on, further on the left, who called for ceasefire very early on. But you're getting to a point within the Jewish American community where it's not just the younger folks who tend to be more on the left and tend to feel less connected to Israel when the only Israel they've ever known is Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu. But you have a broader swath of the Jewish American community, I think, who are willing to use words like apartheid and genocide, which is a hard thing for a lot of Jewish Americans to do, and some still don't. Obviously, I mean, one thing I think to understand is that the 2.5 years since October 7th have been incredibly difficult and incredibly divisive within the Jewish American community. And it's something that, for example, really came up during the New York City mayoral race,
Yeah.
where you absolutely had like a third of the Jewish community or maybe more who strongly supported Zoran Mamdani, and then you had kind of the old guard, who, unfortunately, many embraced Islamophobic attacks against him. And I'm proud to be among those who strongly stood against that, who were delighted to see the alliance between Brad Lander and Zoran Mamdani, which continues to this day, as Brad Lander is now running for Congress. So, it's been a really complicated time within our community.
Yeah, and Brad Lander, folks, is important with Michael Blake, Brad Lander, and Zoran, they all kind of came together, and you had Black Muslim Jews come together to defeat Cuomo. And Brad Lander, last time I checked, described himself as a progressive Zionist.
Yeah.
So he's still Zionist. He
Yep.
still cares deeply about Israel. He's Jewish, but he also calls out Netanyahu, calls out the occupation, and he really risked a lot. And
And he uses the word genocide as well.
he used the word genocide, and he risked a lot to come together with Zoran, right? So this is important to see these fissures that are happening. And like you said with Zoran, I think that's a really good example. Is young Jews. He won young Jews. Like young Jews are like, we like this dude. And so now you're seeing old versus young, class, right? Rich versus the rest. Uh, like a type of increasingly right wing. And then you're seeing what I would say, Deb, is establishment. An establishment goes both ways, Democrat and Republican, conservative and liberal. When you look at the Epstein files, folks, it's pretty bipartisan. It's a specific class of folks, right? And now you're seeing APAC, which is drifting more. It's always been to the right wing, but now is just so egregiously moving to the right wing, and I would say desperately flex. I think it's an act of desperation. I was having a debate with a friend of mine. I wanted your take on this. I
Uh-huh.
think this is an act of weakness that they're coming out with all guns blazing against Cory Bush with Jamal Bowman, right? Against Tom Malinowski. This, to me, Deb, is not strength. This is battening down the hatches, sandbagging, doing everything in your power to crush something that cannot be crushed. Can you talk to us about how this really manifested itself, APAC, literally using its money and its power and anodyne, vague sounding groups to go after Cory Bush?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, we can talk about Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman and not and Ilhan Omar, obviously. They've gone after they went after Andy Levin. Do you
Oh,
remember
yeah,
Andy?
Andy Levin. That's right. They got rid of
Andy
Andy Levin.
Levin was a really interesting case because Andy Levin was actually Jewish
Yep.
and, was the president of his synagogue. One of like two synagogue presidents in Congress, in case you're keeping track. But, he was progressive on Israel Palestine, willing to call out the Israeli government, and God help him. He was actually the lead sponsor of a bill called the Two-State Solution Act, which if there's anything, again, that AIPAC doesn't want, it's any kind of, it's a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. And they went after him hard, so
In
it
Michigan.
in Michigan, right. They went after him very hard. And Haley Stevens, who was the
That's
one who
right.
beat him in that race, they are now supporting for Senate in Michigan. And that can take us to Tom Malinowski, who warned about the Michigan Senate race in a really important piece that he just wrote. So I think, to your point, we've seen APAC go hard and play roles in the defeat of, squad members like Cory Bush, like Jamal Bowman, but again, not exclusively. And the Tom Malinowski case, I think, is really fascinating.
It's like chef's kiss, Deb.
It it's totally fascinating, and I can look, one of the things that I did when I was at J Street for part of the time I was there was manage our lobbying operation. And so it was my job to follow members of Congress very carefully in terms of the positioning that they were taking on specific resolutions and bills and letters and blah, blah, blah. And I mention this because I know very well that Tom Malinowski was not a progressive on Israel Palestine. He was very much a moderate. It was
Like milk
very
toast, vanilla, like,
totally, totally milk toast, middle of the road, right? And so when AIPAC, went after him, and according to Tom Malinowski, and he just wrote a really good piece about this, which he put out on the Bulwark, which I do recommend that people read. According to Tom Malinowski, AIPAC funneled $2.3 million into ads against him. And he writes in this piece that an APAC official told him, a year ago, that they were concerned because he stated that the United States should make case by case judgments about Israeli requests for military aid depending on what was happening on the ground.
the conditional, just maybe some conditional aid, which seems
That's
like the
not even
common sense.
conditional. That's not even, I mean, conditional
Oh, it's
means
not even conditional. Oh, so he was even more benign.
it's even more benign than
Wow.
conditional, right? Because conditional aid means that, put into, and in fact, it's already in US law anyway, but the idea that, if a country doesn't fulfill certain conditions, it doesn't get the aid.
Leahy laws.
Of course, right? And Leahy law has to do with certain, military units. If they're responsible for gross violations of human rights, they can't get it, et cetera, right? So there are lots of US laws that are simply not followed vis-a-vis aid to Israel. All he was saying is that, for example, and this goes back to actually something that even the Biden administration did. If you recall, there was a question of 2,000-pound bombs,
Yep.
whether Israel would get 2,000-pound bombs that are capable of like flattening blocks and blocks, within a very urban area, right? Which is, shall we say, inappropriate, ill advised, not a good idea, not moral, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that the Biden administration was willing to do was hold back some 2,000-pound bombs. And for this, they've been vilified by Netanyahu, et cetera. So basically, all Tom Malinowski is saying is like, you have to look on a case by case basis. You have to ask, should Israel really have 2,000-pound bombs? That's all he was saying, right? Was backing up that kind of like very milquetoast Biden administration position. And an APAC official told him, no, 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 that's too much. And we're afraid that you, Tom Malinowski, because of your foreign policy chops, he was, Assistant Secretary of State, that positioning will gain sway within the Democratic Party, that you will, let's say, be more influential than people who are further on the left. And so we don't want you. And they ended up spending $2.3 million against him.
It just and then can you tell him the strategy was we'll spend $2.3 million to put Tom Malinowski in his place, the most milquetoast centrist, pro-Israel, self-described Zionist who just went a little bit left, just
Yep.
a little bit left
Yep.
against APAC norms, and they thought their preferred candidate would win. So we'll take out
Right.
the center-left Tom Malinowski, and this is, folks, for those who don't know, we've talked about a lot on the left hook, but New Jersey's 11th district, a very educated, affluent district that allegedly is center left. This was new governor of New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill's district, right? So she
Right.
becomes governor. So they're like, all right, you got this open seat. So they're like, we'll get Tom Malinowski because he actually might win. We'll prop up our candidate. Deb, can you tell him what actually happened?
Right. So what actually happens is that their preferred candidate came in a distant third. And so you basically have a tie, more or less, between Malinowski, who had been the front runner, and Ana Lilia Mejia, who is a progressive, basically anti-Zionist. I'm not very, very familiar with her views.
Abolish ICE, Working Families Party,
For sure.
and I don't know if she's anti-Zion, but I know for a fact the most vocally pro-Palestinian of the bunch.
There oh, for sure. For sure, right? For sure, in terms of you would think, in terms of her actual positioning, she would be the least preferred alternative. You would think, right? But it turns out they were more concerned about Tom Malinowski. So they pour in all this money in, by the way, totally disingenuous ads that had nothing to do with Israel whatsoever, of course, right? And so they do that. Their candidate comes in a distant third. Ana Lilia Mejia comes out just ahead of Tom Malinowski. And so that's in the Democratic primary. Because it's a very Democratic district, the assumption is that she will win and become representative. However, it was a special election. So this is limited time only, and then there will be a general election in November, right? So APAC says, not to worry, we don't really care. We're going to make sure that she's out come November. And so that's the outcome. And now um, you know, the question is what else APAC is going to do or is already doing in terms of those Democratic primaries, that will determine who the Democrats will be facing off in November. And they are heavily involved in 4 races in Illinois, doing very similar things to what
Yep.
we saw against Tom Malinowski. In fact, in some cases, going after that kind of, in between Democrat that's a little bit, willing to criticize Israel or, and potentially benefiting the candidate on the far left. And that's one of the things that Malinowski talks about in his piece. Uh, is this Michigan Senate race, for example, where he says he's concerned that APAC is going to go really hard against Mallory McMorrow, who is, critical of Israel, but not as far to the left as Abdul
Abdul
El
Said.
Sayed, right? He is the further left candidate. And so Malinowski's concern as a moderate is that, APAC is going to basically uh, see that El Sayed wins the Democratic primary. And, as the point that he makes is that if the Republicans then win the general election against El Sayed, even better, right? I mean, obviously, this is an organization that is, we know, chiefly funded at this point by GOP billionaires. And so they are, they're trying to determine who the Democrats are in Congress. And then if they have the opportunity to actually make sure that it's Republicans that win, even better.
So that was a fantastic breakdown. Thank you so much. I explained the Cliff Notes version of that to Hakeem Jeffries when I was co-hosting with Joy a week ago. You heard his response. I asked him, I brought up Tom Malinowski, and I said, why, oh, why would Democrats then support and or take money from APAC that spends money against Democrats?
Yeah.
And then I asked him point blank, will you continue taking money from APAC? And he essentially said no. And so going back to refusing to release the audit that shows that Biden's kind of blind, zealous support for Netanyahu and Israel helped in a way cost him the election. You've seen all the polls. It's even gone, people have become more radicalized in the past 2 years. Why, Deb, would the Democratic establishment say, oh, APAC, you went against Tom Malinowski. You went against Cory Bush. You went against Andy Levin. You're now using these anodyne, vanilla sounding organizations to funnel money through, right, to go against our candidates. And we know that you support the January 6th insurrectionists. And we know that you're all in with white Christian nationalists. And we know you're all in with the most right wing folks. We'll take your money.
Yeah. Look, I mean, obviously that is a question. And you had a great interview with Hakeem Jeffries. And that's ultimately a question for him and the Democratic leadership. And we certainly you didn't get satisfactory answers, right? You got kind of, wriggling away from actually answering the questions. But I think ultimately we're dealing with a system that is fundamentally flawed,
Yeah.
where money in politics is a huge problem. And it's not just APAC. I mean, APAC is a big example. But one thing that I really appreciated, I keep talking about that Malinowski piece. One thing that I also appreciated about it was that he mentioned that, crypto super PACs
Yep.
and AI super PAC, he's equally concerned about those and their ability to,
We
funnel.
talked about it on this show. We talked about how Democrats are starting these PACs run by Democrats for pro-growth deregulation, all funded by crypto and AI.
Right. And I ultimately, there there needs to be a fundamental change in terms of the question of money in politics. And we know that that's an issue on the Republican side, but it's an issue on the Democratic side as well. And obviously, the Democratic Party is not willing to face it, is not willing to fundamentally reform. And I think that's what you're seeing when put Hakeem Jeffries on the hot seat and ask him tough questions, and he avoids answering.
It's a corporate Dems. That's why I appreciate you saying that also, Deb, because it's a problem that goes across both aisles. And I'm sure you get criticized. I mean, I know you get criticized. I get criticized across the board by some blue and on folks. Vote blue no matter who. And I'm like, really? Like they support Mamdani? Vote blue no matter who. Really? Like Hakeem Jeffries, who can't answer simple questions and like won't go with the majority on several issues. It's corporate Dems, and they get paid by folks, both sides of the aisle, right now, like the Joe Lonsdale, the co-founder of Palantir, is literally supporting the Democratic candidate, right? Because he wants this mayor of San Jose to become the next governor, right?
Mm,
They've raised over $100 million, right? So you got AI and crypto, both sides of the aisle, APAC, both sides of the aisle. And the reason why people say, well, why do they have Akeem Jeffries as leader? He's so ineffective. And the answer from the insiders is he's an effective fundraiser. That's why he's still an effective fundraiser. But I do see tides shifting, and I wanted your take on this.
yeah.
Two things that have happened, which are pretty big to me. In Chicago, this was huge. Representative Jan Schakowsky has withdrawn her endorsement of Cook County Commissioner Donna Miller in the 2nd Congressional District over Miller receiving funding from APAC
Yeah.
donors and an APAC super PAC that is running TVATs for folks who don't follow politics. That's huge. And then, I don't know if you saw, this was yesterday. Gavin Newsom, when asked by Adam Mockler, uh, hey, are you going to take money from APAC and special interest groups? He said, no, no, I'm going to reject money from APAC and special interest groups. He didn't respond to the way he responded to Van Lathan and said, that's interesting. Interesting. Remember that, folks, when he's like, that's interesting that you're asking me that. Now, we don't know if that means he's going to take money from APAC because, Deb, you and I know, APAC now is funneling money through these vanilla sounding Democracy Today,
Right.
organizations. So we don't know
United
that.
Democracy Project.
Yeah, Democracy Project, Growth Project. So I want someone to really drill down and be like, APAC donors, APAC affiliation. But the fact that you saw those two things happen in Chicago and with Newsom, your take.
Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out of love, nothing but love to Jan Schakowsky, who is retiring. She is phenomenal, Jewish member of Congress, very progressive. She is one of the members of Congress who's a co-sponsor of the Ban the Bombs Act, which is led by Delia Ramirez. And so Jan has really been a leader on this issue for a long time, and I, was really privileged to have an opportunity to work with her staff during my time working on these issues vis-a-vis the Hill. So I'm not tremendously surprised at Jan doing that because Jan understands the politics around all of this stuff really well. She is not beloved of APAC by any stretch of the imagination herself. So I was really glad to see her doing that. But I know she had a long time relationship with Donna Miller, and so for her to come out and do that was not nothing either. And she
Yeah,
deserved,
and
she
because she could have just been like, I'm retiring, I don't care. But she
right,
didn't.
exactly. No, she's phenomenal, and all credit to her. So, as far as Gavin Newsom, I mean that it's really interesting what he'll actually do, as you note, is a big question. And what in answer to your question about APAC and kind of the way they function, I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is that APAC has only had its own PAC and super PAC going back now, I want to say, I should know exactly, it's like 4 or 5 years. Before that, for very, very, decades of its existence, um, AIPAC did not have its own PAC, right? The PAC in AIPAC does not, it's Public Affairs Committee, right? So it's not Political Action Committee. So what it would do for a very long time was basically encourage
There you go.
its supporters to give money. It would encourage bundling, and it was always involved. It was always involved in funneling money toward candidates, but it didn't do it openly through its own PAC.
Yep.
And
That's
then
key.
AIPAC decided like 4 or 5 years ago to flex and say, okay, because one interesting thing is J Street had been able to claim since its founding until 4 or 5 years ago when AIPAC started its own PAC that J Street actually operated the largest pro-Israel, but also pro-peace PAC, the largest pro-Israel PAC, because AIPAC didn't have its own PAC. And then AIPAC said, "Screw that! We're going to start our own PAC and our own super PAC," and called it the United Democracy Project, which is this, of course, obviously totally vanilla name that who could possibly dislike it, right? Um, and so, it made that pivot, but at the same time, in these Illinois races, it has there are these super PACs that have suddenly come into existence called like Electing Chicago Women and Affordable Chicago Now. And we won't know until the FEC reports come out. But the heavy suspicion is that basically it's APAC donors that are funding these PACs, that are funneling the money toward APAC's designated candidates in these 4 races, right? And it's all being done in a way to try to obscure AIPAC's involvement.
That's key, folks. What Deb just said is key. They're not, APAC realizes, oh, the brand name is toxic,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, the APAC funders are sending the money through APAC affiliated anodyne vanilla sounding PACs. But people are catching on. It's not, but that's the key. That's the key thing now. That's the key thing. It's the
Yeah.
same thing that happened with Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman. The record amount of money was spent through the most anodyne sounding names. And then when you saw these ads attacking them, they barely mentioned Israel. They mentioned, I don't know, whatever issue.
Oh, they don't mention Israel.
Yeah, ever at all, right?
At all, right? Because AIPAC, is smart enough to know, obviously, that, public opinion is not where they would like it to be vis-a-vis Israel and certainly unconditional support for Israel. The attacks on Tom Malinowski were trying to portray him as, supporting Trump's deportation campaign. I mean, they try to find something that they know that Democratic voters will object to, and they make the ads about that
Yep.
having nothing to do with Israel whatsoever.
2.4 million folks. And then Tom Malinowski, you should read his response. I think it was last week on Democracy-ish. We read his response. It was a great response.
Yeah,
And they radicalized Tom Malinowski. He's like, I will do everything in my power to go against, and this was key. He goes against any candidate who's overtly or surreptitiously funded by AIPAC. So now they've it's just, what you're seeing is this, it's almost like this Trumpian strategy of both arrogance and fear and anger and self-desperate. We have power and we're going to use it and we're going to bash everyone, not realizing, in my opinion, like I said, again, this is a sign of weakness. And what you're doing is, yes, you are causing immense harm. Yes, you're taking your scalps, as they say, but at a cost of radicalizing so many people against you, right? And so now the allies of AIPAC, the establishment, Hakeem Jeffries, the DNC, Republicans, right-wing billionaires, but also, I am sure you saw this very interesting and disturbing interview between Tucker Carlson, who is a terrible human being, folks, and Mike Huckabee. But Tucker Carlson, as a terrible human being, did something with Huckabee and Tucker, is that he asked follow-ups. And you saw Mike Huckabee, and you and I have talked about this, but people don't. I was talking to, we were doing Democracy-ish, and I was trying to explain people that Mike Huckabee now is just openly telling the white Christian nationalist plot. And when you heard what he said, Israel should just take over the entire Middle East. Israel, God's children. Yes, no. This is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. As a Jew, when you hear Mike Huckabee and what he said with his white Christian nationalist plot, just out in the open, what was your response?
Well, let me take a step. I will answer that, but I do want to just take a step back and remind us that in Trump's first term, his ambassador to Israel was David Friedman.
Yep.
And David Friedman, as has been the case with, most U.S. ambassadors to Israel, it hasn't always been the case, but going back some decades now, was Jewish. But what was mold breaking about him was that he was a long time supporter of the settlement enterprise. One settlement in particular, Beit El, he had a very, very strong connection with. And very, this is a figure who was against a two-state solution, long time, established hatred toward Palestinians, and by the way, a longtime hater of progressive Jews who didn't share his perspective. He had actually called us capos, which
Yeah.
is like the worst insult that one Jew could ever say to another, which is basically labeling them a Nazi collaborator. It doesn't really get worse than that. So David Friedman was the ambassador in Trump's first term, and he basically was the settlers, ambassador. And now, so that's what we have in Trump 1. In Trump 2, now we have Christian Zionism's ambassador,
Yep.
right? And this is a man who, his conception of pursuing American interests is, pursuing what, his interpretation of what's in the Bible. And we saw, I mean, when Tucker, and I no love for him whatsoever.
None, folks. He's
Even
terrible.
though and I will say too that even though he asked follow-up questions, he missed out on some very important follow-up questions, which I certainly would have asked if I had been interviewing Mike Huckabee, and I'm happy to point out one or two of those. But he did ask him, like, okay, if you believe the Bible gives the Jews the right to this land, well, what land exactly are we talking about? Is it from the Nile to the Euphrates? And basically, and I watched the whole like 2.5 hour interview, which
You're
I don't
masochist.
recommend. I am a masochist. I don't recommend the folks do it, but I did watch the entire thing. And basically what Huckabee answers to that is, um, well, yeah, I would have, what exactly does he say? I would have no problem with Israel. Oh, it would be fine if
Yes.
they took it all. That's the word the phrase he uses. It would be fine if they took it all, but they don't want it. So, we don't have to actually worry about them taking Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and parts of Saudi Arabia, whatever, because they don't actually want it. Well, Mike Huckabee, and here's a question, here's a follow-up question that Tucker should have asked, which he didn't. Well, Mike Huckabee, what about the fact that Israel does control territory now in on the border in Syria, on the border with Israel, right? That it took during the Gaza war, that it hasn't given back. It's also done the same thing in Lebanon,
Yep.
right? And you have a situation where there are actually Israeli, Jewish Israeli settlers who want to see settlements in Syria and in Lebanon. So is that okay with you, Mike Huckabee? Because it's not clear. I mean, if the Bible gave Jews this land, well, then why not? What's wrong with settlements there, right? And you have a situation. One thing that Tucker did not call Mike Huckabee on at all, which I mean, to me was really striking, was Mike Huckabee said, and I quote, Area C is Israel.
Mm,
He's talking about, right, this is the West Bank we're talking about.
I didn't hear that. Okay.
I watched the whole damn thing. This didn't get cited in the media either for some reason. Tucker did not ask a follow-up question on this. Area C is 60% of the West Bank.
Yep.
And Mike Huckabee said, Area C is Israel, and therefore Israeli. I see a question in the chat. So let me just explain Area C really quickly because I saw someone was asking. or a few people are asking, okay, under the Oslo Accords, I'll keep this super brief.
Yeah, yeah.
Under the Oslo,
We're taking the DeLorean back to 1994. There we go.
yes, right. We're going back to the Oslo Accords, right, of circa 1990s, right? And Israel and the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority was created pursuant to the Oslo Accords. And the West Bank was separated into three areas, right? You have, and this is still in effect, right? You have Area A, which is supposed to be under the sole authority of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. There's Area B, which is basically under Israeli military control, but otherwise, in terms of civilian matters, supposed to be under the PA. And then you have Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, where Israel settlements are, but there are also Palestinian villages in the West Bank, 60% of the territory. And ever since also, it's been under Israeli control, but with the understanding, that eventually we were pursuing a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians, as a part of which, the West Bank, including Area C, with maybe some land swaps, right, was supposed to be part of a Palestinian state. And so here, and this is 60% of the West Bank, you have Mike Huckabee declare Israel hasn't even declared that it is annexing Area C, although they act like it on the ground, which
Yeah.
is another
Yet
thing.
they haven't declared it yet.
They haven't declared it yet, but they are doing everything they can to drive Palestinians out of the West Bank, which is something I've, talked quite a lot about. But they have not declared it. They have not said Area C is Israel the way that Mike Huckabee just did in an interview. Mike Huckabee is annexed, and here he works for a president, Donald Trump, who promised, in the context of, the Gaza plan and getting the Arab states and Muslim states on board, he said, don't worry about the West Bank. I won't let Israel annex it. Which, if you believe that, obviously we have a bridge to sell you because it's
Yeah.
happening on the ground. But here, he said, he claims he's not going to let Israel annex the territory. Well, Mike Huckabee just annexed 60% of it for Israel.
I didn't see that clip. And I'm so glad you mentioned because I didn't see the full two. I mean, I thought what he said was disturbing enough, but if he's giving Area C to them, and folks, for those who haven't followed, what Israel has deliberately done is, even though Area C was supposed to be, part of the major land swap, and this will demarcate this for the future Palestinian states, the settlements have been mushrooming like this,
Absolutely.
mushrooming. So all that's left is like this sliver, this almost like moth-eaten sliver of land, but still, nonetheless, it's something left for Palestinians. You have Hebron there. You have these major cities, like Deb said, 60%. I've been there 3 times. And Israel, I mean, the settlers, they just flex, they control, they do what they want. They run roughshod. Like, these are our parts of the woods. What are you going to do about it, right? And so the fact that he says, "Oh yeah, Area C," they just give it to him. That with what that translates to is what two-state solution?
And Waj, I'll have to point out the exact part of the interview that you need to watch to see this. That's exactly what Mike Huckabee does. Mike Huckabee, literally, in this part of the interview, he has a map of the West Bank. He shows Tucker a map of the West Bank, and he says, well, Area C, 60% is Israel. So look at what's left, the 40% that's A and B, it's not contiguous. How are you going to have a Palestinian state? He uses that. And I mean, this is a guy who's never been in favor. He's always been opposed to a two-state solution, just like David Friedman was.
Yeah.
Right? He's never even been willing to call the Palestinians. He doesn't use the word Palestinians, right? He doesn't believe that there are people. He doesn't use the word Palestinians. This is the man who is your and my tax dollars are paying for him to be ambassador to Israel. And so, while I think that Tucker could and should have done a better job following up on certain points, this was certainly a major one. Look, I give him credit for going and interviewing Mike Huckabee, and showing, I hope that others with a different perspective than Tucker Carlson, who, is he's platformed Nick Fuentes. He's an
He's a white
extremely,
nationalist. He is, folks. I'm sorry. He is.
and he
He's a
himself,
racist.
I mean, he very much is on the same page with Mike Huckabee in terms of, Christianity should guide US foreign policy and all of that. Obviously, you and I watch, probably not. Probably
Yeah.
not. That's not our thing.
It won't be that good for us.
No, it wouldn't work out that well for, but I would love to see more folks, mainstream folks,
Yep.
news outlets interviewing Mike Huckabee and asking him really difficult questions, including some that, again, Tucker did not ask, and really, show the extent to which this man is extremely problematic. And I remember at the beginning of the first Trump administration when David Friedman was up for confirmation to be ambassador. It was really big news. It
Yep.
was really controversial, and he almost wasn't confirmed. It was a really close vote. It's a shame that he was confirmed. But with Mike Huckabee, there was very little discussion of it when it came to him getting confirmed. I think a large part of it is that by that point, there was already just a deluge of so much other stuff that the new Trump administration was doing that no one had the bandwidth to think about the implications of having this Christian Zionist, anti Palestinian, let the Jews have the entire Middle East guy, which is not good for the Jews, by the way, guy be U.S. ambassador to Israel.
I
And I think
tried. I
there's
tried,
a
Deb.
lot
You
more
tried.
scrutiny.
I tried, you tried, because I've been following Mike Huckabee for a while, and I always tried on this show. We always try to warn about white Christian nationalism. The number one largest Zionist group in America, folks, is Christians United for Israel, KUFI.
Yeah.
It is a white evangelical Christian group based out of Texas. It is Benjamin Netanyahu's core base, a core part of Trump's base. They have not broken ranks with him in over 10 years. Our white Christian evangelicals still has about 75 to 80% support. When Donald Trump in the first administration did a disastrous removing of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the two people who gave the opening and closing prayers was Pastor Hagee, a white Christian evangelical, and Robert Jeffress, a white Christian evangelical, right? And one of the co-authors of Project 2025 is a white Christian nationalist. So these people, folks, are driving this, and they're driving the rest of us literally off a cliff. Mike Huckabee clearly does not give an F, because Mike Huckabee believes, for those who don't know, we've shared this on the show, but this is why they're aligned with Jews. They're not aligned with Jews. They're using Jews as pawns. They believe, according to their narrative, that Jews need to control Jerusalem as a necessary precondition for Jesus to come back. Jesus comes back, and the first group that Christians kill, wait for it, are the Jews. The second group are the Muslims, right? And then you have what? Eventually, the rapture. So it's literally a nihilistic pro-death cult that is using Jews as pawns, right? They love Israel. Jews, not so much. And when I was in Israel talking to Jewish scholars and Zionists about this, I said, you have aligned yourself with white Christian evangelicals who are anti-Semitic, Deb, and who are using you as props and pawns. And they said, yeah, we know, but we don't believe it. So who cares? They get what they want. We get what we want. It was so naked quid pro quo. And what I said to them, and I warned them, I said, you don't realize you're in bed with white nationalists, white Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis. And they thought, we'll keep them at bay. They'll be tamed. And now, Deb, you're seeing the monster is in the White House.
Well, but I think everything that you just said is right. But I think, if you look at Benjamin Netanyahu, is there any sense in which he, has recognized that this is a bad strategy or is changing course? Or, of course not.
Nope.
Not at all. In fact, you see, the ultra right wing regime in Israel doubling down on this strategy,
Wow.
doubling down in terms of, making common cause with parties like the AfD in Germany, right? Like, neo-Nazi parties that at the same time are, in some way pro-Israel in their conception of it. In terms of the relationship with with governments like, Viktor Orban's in Hungary, or, the Slovakian government. And here again, you see that it's Netanyahu and the Trump administration is
That's right.
doing the same thing. And so, let's talk about Marco Rubio for a moment. And,
In Munich.
his recent trip to Europe, which started out in Munich, right, where he gave a speech warning the Europeans about civilizational erasure because people, they're letting folks like you, Waj,
Yes.
they're letting Muslims immigrate, to Europe. And this is creating, civilizational erasure against Christian Europe, which he sees as the ally to his white Christian nationalist America, should be a white Christian nationalist Europe. And so he's warning them of this civilizational erasure, warning them about the evils of immigration destroying their countries, which, certainly we've seen that also from J.D. Vance, who made a very similar, well, I mean, even a more extreme speech a year before in Munich. Donald Trump has made the same noises himself. And then after Munich, where, of course, does Marco Rubio go? He goes to Slovakia and he goes to Hungary. He goes to, visit Viktor Orban. He goes to, who is about to face elections. He pledges Donald Trump's strong support for Orban in the upcoming elections,
Yep.
basically says, if there's anything that Hungary needs, including, aid that would bolster his campaign, that Donald Trump will do whatever it takes to support Viktor Orban. And so you have this, this alliance between these right wing conservative forces here in the United States, the minority of European countries like Hungary, Slovakia, and a few others. And, in other parts of the world as well, like when, Bolsonaro was in power in Brazil, Modi in India, etc. Those kind of reactionary powers supporting each other in a way that I think progressives around the world don't do nearly as good a job of supporting each other, and in a way that I think we really need to, we really have to, but we haven't.
And also, Netanyahu has no problem that they're anti-Semitic. Has no
No,
problem because it's about power by any means necessary. And these same forces that you mentioned are perfectly fine in engaging in a disastrous regime change with a war with Iran. We all know the Iranian Velayat e Faqih, the guardianship of the jury, it's a theocracy, is repressive. We all know that, folks. But as we've seen, bringing back full circle, what Obama did, and I always gave him credit for it. I said the US Iran deal. And remember, I'm old enough to remember all the hawks at that time. How dare you? This is terrible. Diplomacy with Iran. Ah, you're weak. And then even some of these hawks leading into the Trump administration, including General Mattis, who was Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, he openly said, you know what? I was wrong about this. This actually helped.
the
And
J
then
was working, yeah.
it was working. And then Netanyahu got in the ear of Trump, and then you had Kushner and Friedman. What did Donald Trump do? I'm going to blow it up, as he does. What happened? Made everything worse. Just like the trade war. What happened? Made everything worse. Just like the tariffs. What happened? Made everything worse. Then, second administration, Benjamin Netanyahu comes again in the ear of Donald Trump. Donald Trump bombs Iran. We took out their nuclear capabilities. Oops, we made a mistake. So now, apparently, Deb, tomorrow, ahead of the State of the Union, what we are hearing, and I hope some cooler heads prevail, but what we're hearing is that he's going to announce strikes on Iran.
In the State of the Union.
Or
It
right before.
Right before. I mean, extremely, extremely problematic. I certainly hope that it doesn't happen. But the fact is that there are at this point two carrier strike groups that Trump has moved to the Middle East. And usually, if a gun isn't introduced into a plot, eventually it's going to go off. And, the same thing obviously happened in Venezuela, where we sent one strike group down to Venezuela, and it was used obviously to abduct President Maduro, without congressional authorization, against international law, for the benefit of Trump's billionaire oil cronies. And, you know, a war with Iran is just ill advised in and
Understatement of
ill-advised
the year, Deb.
ill-advised, illegal in terms of US law if there's no congressional authorization, and the Trump administration has made no effort whatsoever to seek any congressional authorization. They have made very little attempt to make any kind of case to the American people who are overwhelmingly against military action against Iran. I mean, the latest polls from a month ago said 70% of Americans oppose military action. Less than 20% are in
I
favor.
think it's gone up to 8,
So
80%.
80%. I mean, so the American people don't favor it. Congress hasn't authorized it. It's against international law. You can't just go attacking, launching major military strikes. God knows how far this is going to go against another country because you feel like it when that country is not, actually threatening you, and it's not in self defense. You can't do that. But this administration has shown no um, respect at all, obviously, for international law, and no respect even for the checks and balances that are written into our Constitution. As we saw, I mean, not only does Trump, have no respect for the role of Congress, and in any case, Republicans in Congress have, feel no need to do their jobs, but even when his stacked Supreme Court rules against him on tariffs,
Yep.
Trump makes it very clear that he has no intention of abiding by any other branch of government. So it's an extremely problematic situation. Regional powers, the Gulf states, other Arab states, Turkey, and are all opposed to military strikes. And, there is a really serious potential of unintended consequences. Certainly will be negative impacts here at home on the pockets of American consumers. If you have a situation where Iran attacks oil installations, let's say in the Gulf states, if you have Iran attack navigation, if you have them block off the Strait of Hormuz, for example, something like that, who do you think pays the price for that? It's American consumers who are already suffering. And, as inflation rises even further. So there are just, so not to mention, obviously, the real risk that there will be casualties for our troops. I mean, this is just bad
And
in
blowback,
so many ways.
spillover. I was explaining to people who don't understand, this is the month of Ramadan. 85% of Muslims, 1.7 billion Muslims around the world are Sunni. I'm Sunni Muslim, for those who don't know. A minority group is Shia Muslims, about 15%. Iran is Shia. It's run by the Vilayat al-Fiqhi, or the guardianship of the jurists. So even though it's kind of a theocratic government, for the religious clergy, for many Shia Muslims around the world, it's they see them as spiritual leaders. So it's not just political. For many Muslims, it's religious. So if you're going to attack them during Ramadan, and if they're openly now flirting with a regime change, there is going to be blowback, folks. That's good. I mean, like, look, we saw with the war on terror. Oh, this will just be contained. Nothing is contained anymore, right? So the potential to radicalize extremist groups, the potential against blowback against American companies, American tourists, against our allies. I mean, it's like we never ever learn. Anytime we interfere in the Middle East or even in Central Latin America, it always turns out worse. So this is one of those situations. It'll make for a great distraction from Epstein, but it'll make the situation much worse. And yes, you have Saudi Arabia and UAE who are sitting there also saying rah 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 regime change. But what they also realize that if there is forceful regime change, it might spill over in their borders as well. Right? It's like it just, and then you see what's happening in Gaza still. So now you have an entire powder keg in the Middle East where U.S. is aligned with Israel against Iran, which is again terrible for not just Americans but also for Jews, because then the Jews get blamed. It is these people, but they don't care. Mike Huckabee doesn't care. He wants the rapture. Netanyahu doesn't care because he wants to stay in power and he wants the river to the sea. These people just do not care. And it's the rest of us who will get screwed, which is why we need to turn that number from 70 to 80% against the war to 90%. And let's see, again, folks, allegedly, this is what's happening. But as Deb said, this is not just, rumors. This is like out. This is like this like the raptor testing the fence. This is saber rattling. They're getting in position to do this. And what we've heard is Vance and I think someone else in the administration is saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold back." But then you have Lindsey Graham and others just all in. Lindsey Graham said, "Yeah, we're gonna do it. Get rid of it." So
And
it's
Rubio as well.
yeah, Rubio as well. It's the worst, and the white Christian nationalist base, folks. Deb, fantastic conversation. I kept you longer than I assumed, but we always go long. Can you shamelessly promote yourself?
Thank you so much, Waj. It is always amazing to be with you. So, folks, I have a Substack, as Waj noted, called The Debrief with Debra Shushan, and have lots of interesting conversations, podcasts with people, and sometimes write some stuff which I hope will be interesting and helpful for folks. So, please come and subscribe. It would be a pleasure to have you over at The Debrief as well. And I'm always excited to join Waj.
No, and I really appreciate you reaching out last week. I was gonna reach out to you, but I've just been it's Ramadan, I'm busy, but I'm so glad Deb emailed. And never at a loss of conversations. And Deb is a fountain of knowledge. And someone was say in the comment section about a half hour ago. I don't know if that person's still there. They said they self-described themselves as Lebanese, and they said, this is the first time I'm actually having listening to a Jewish American person speak so candidly about APAC, and that like they just really appreciated it, and they're like, "Wow, thank you." I think it's important, and it goes back full circle to what we were talking about. I think it's important for people, and it sucks. It's totally unfair. The burden's always on us, especially if you're a minority community, that you have to your people, the entirety of your people are blamed for the sins of a few. Right. Number one domestic the terror threat in America is white supremacists, folks. And I do not want every white person on earth to sit there and apologize for the actions committed by violent criminals they've never met. But if you're black, if you're brown, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, we always have to, come out and say it. And I think it's important for us to have this conversation, because if we don't, we cede the ground to the white Christian nationalists and to the freaks. And they are in the minority, right? They're in the minority. I think it's very important for us to speak and have this conversation. And the people you have it in your communities, we represent the Jews. It is us. Netanyahu says it. I represent the Jews, and we're like, not Netanyahu. You don't. Just like Saudi Arabia says, we represent the Muslims. I'm like, nope, MBS, not as long as I live. So it's important for us to have this conversation. We have to create a multicultural coalition of the willing to fight back against fascists. Folks, thank you for joining us. As you can see, I think I'm completely dry mouth now. Iftar, the breaking of the fast happens at 5:55. So this might be my last. I've been going 3 hours straight. So I think I might be done for the day. I literally, I don't think I can speak. It's fine. It's all good, folks. It's fine. The fasting is easy. But yeah, you can hear I think that's a dry mouth. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to Deb. Deb, how much does it cost to become a paid subscriber?
Uh, it's $6 a month or $60 for a year.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super. Like, that's a deal.
And I really want to say, Waj, I want to say Ramadan Kareem to
Thank
you,
you.
and to all Muslims, whether you're fasting or not during Ramadan. I just want to wish a really reflective, meaningful month to everyone. And I know there are many Jews who would like to do the same and reach out to our many Muslim friends and express our solidarity. So hope it's a meaningful month for everyone.
No, thank you. And all the atheists, this is where you're like, this is why I don't believe in God. And then when it's Yom Kippur for Jews, you guys go for an entire day. That's why they're like, this is why I'm not Jewish either. We just extend the pain for 30 days. Thank you all. Thank you for the kind note, Deb. But this year is easy. What we will say is this: look, it's a discipline. It's not too bad. It's evening at like sunset. It's like 5:55. And what I think of honestly is it's easy. This year is very easy. But I think there's people in America starving. There are food deserts in America. Our kids are food insecure. Look what's happening in Gaza. Look what's happening in Ukraine. So it hopefully creates more empathy, and it makes us realize we're all human beings, and it makes us, inshallah, better people. That's why we do it, right? And if
Inshallah.
you're- and if you are if I may, if you are part of a religious tradition, and if you do believe in God or gods, and your religious discipline does not make you a better human being, you might be doing religion wrong. You might be doing it like Mike Huckabee. Just saying. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to The Left Hook and Deb's fantastic Substack. Everyone else, please take care. And for those who joined us late, some people said they joined us late. This will be up on Deb's Substack and my Substack. We went from domestic and we went all the way to the Middle East. We talk about AIPAC, we talk about the DNC, we talk about J Street, we talk about the establishment, we talk about Mike Huckabee, white Christian nationalism, and a potential war with Iran that inshallah, does not happen. Thank you all for watching. Be kind, be informed, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you so much, Waj. Thanks,
Bye.